Coming down with the heartache.
On this episode of Between Two Beers, we talk to Hireme-Smiler. Honey has one of the most impressive CVs in Kiwi sport. She played 32 tests for the Kiwi Ferns and attended 4 World Cups, won a World Sevens title in 2013, made her debut for the Black Ferns at 32 and attended the Rugby World Cup in 2014, where she was named to the World Cup Dream Team. She signed for St George in the NRL in 2018 and in 2020 was appointed a member of the New Zealand Order of Merit for services to rugby league. In this episode, we talk about how Honey fared at the Putaruru Athletics Championships as a teenager, some of the toughest times from her childhood and how she turned a corner, why she only discovered her legal name as a teenager, the sudden loss of her mum and the lessons and strength she received from her final weeks, why she peaked as an athlete in her mid-30s, and the time she skipped from a Sevens World Cup to a Rugby League World Cup in a week. There were some really powerful moments of reflection in this episode. Honey is a sports superwoman, but by sharing some of the most vulnerable moments of her life, the struggles she's been through and the character building lessons along the way, I'm sure there's something in here everyone can relate to. Just a super inspiring woman. If you like what we're doing at Between Two Beers, check out our website at betweentwobeers.com and consider supporting the cause on our Patreon link for the cost of a cup of coffee a month. Or if you'd like to be our major sponsor, there's an opening there too. Get in touch. Also, if you enjoy the app, any support or sharing on social media is much appreciated, as well as subscribing to the show in your podcast app. Thanks for tuning in.
The heartache.
Honey Hireme-Smiler, welcome to Between Two Beers.
Yeah, thanks. Hey, thanks for having me. It's like to be here.
We're practically neighbours. We worked out Honey lives about a 2-minute drive from our house here in Glenview. Shay, we were just talking about how cool it is that we can just get these sort of world-class athletes to come into my little office out the back of our house. And we've had a few through the doors now, but I don't think we've had anyone quite so decorated as you, Honey. So, yeah, we're very grateful for your presence and thanks for giving us your time tonight.
No, it's cool. It's like just a casual stroll around the neighbourhood, really.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, it's good to be here.
We were just talking, you're retired now. What does Wednesday night look like for you?
Usually first on the list is Shortland Street. Then whatever rugby or league game is happening or replay, and then bed by 8:30. So I'm ready 10 minutes past my usual bedtime, actually.
Wow, she's turned up with a Red Bull, keeping you up late on a school night, but hopefully it's worthwhile. Shay, when you get us started, how do you know Honey?
Well, this is the first time that we've met. As a sports fan, I obviously followed you in your career. I do wonder if we ever cross paths at Ma Baker's in Putaruru, because I grew up in Taupo, and when I visited my brother and sister here at university, that was the one place we stopped on the drive up every time. It was the only place I was ever allowed to have a Coke. So do you know, you must know where that is.
100%. Everyone in Putaruru knows Ma Baker's, and if you were there on a Sunday morning, you probably would have seen me there for the 25 years I lived my life there. So Sunday, Ma Baker's is the best hangover food ever.
Yeah. I was too young at that stage, so I can't claim to know that I was that would have been that way. But Steve, as the resident sporting journalist, you must have covered Honey's progress over the years.
Yeah, names popped up all over the place in sort of my sport job over the last 8-10 years. But I don't think it was perhaps until Michael Burgess did a really great profile on you a couple of years ago, 2019 it might have been, talking about how everyone calls you Auntie in the team. And I don't think the depth of what you'd achieved really hit home until that piece, and he sort of put it all together, and I was like, wow.
Have you got a list of the achievements?
Yeah, I do, and I'm actually going to read it out. For those who don't know Honey's honours, I'm going to read this so you get a bit of a picture. So, New Zealand Rugby League Women's Player of the Year 2007, 2012, 2017. Waikato Sportswoman of the Year 2013, 2014, 2015. Played the tournament at the Women's Rugby League World Cup in 2013. Waikato Women's Rugby Player of the Year 2013, 2014, 15 and 16. The top try scorer and player of the tournament for the 2017 Rugby League World Cup. played at 4 Rugby League World Cups, a Rugby World Cup, and a Rugby Sevens World Cup, and in 2020 appointed a member of the New Zealand Order of Merit for services to Rugby League. So quite a bit there, isn't there?
Yeah, some of them are, so I can't probably track very well in terms of the years, but funny that, that the order one is always quite interesting to me, because actually when they got in contact with me, they had, sort of a similar list, but they actually asked me to pick which sport that I would get the service for. Was it going to be rugby or rugby league? Because,
you couldn't ask for both?
Yeah, well, that's what I sort of said, well, I sort of had a balance of both, and they were saying, oh, yeah, but we can't actually put you down for both. It's too separate. So I was like, oh, okay, well, rugby league, because that's where I started. So that's how it actually sort of unfolded with that honorary, which I actually just showed up to went along to the ceremony last week, because although I was in the 2020 New Year's Honours list, and then obviously COVID hit all last year, and so the ceremonies kept getting delayed. And so what they did is shifted everyone from 2020 to 2021 ceremonies. And I didn't know a lot about, what that kind of all meant. And you're allowed to take a few guests, and it's quite an intimate ceremony. And we went along to Government House in Auckland. It was just last week. And it was pretty emotional, when I sort of realised what it kind of, I suppose, all meant. And I took along my dad and my papa and my auntie, my first cousin, and my wife. And it was super emotional. There's only 10 of us on the day getting them, and we got to spend like a real decent amount of time with the Governor General. And it was a real eye opener, I suppose, and how, I suppose, important that acknowledgement was.
So one of my favourite questions to ask athletes who have achieved a lot is, did you fulfil your potential? Reading that list of awards and honours, it seems like you kind of did it all, but is there any part of you that feels like you could have done more?
Yes, there is. I think I probably exceeded my own expectation, and I don't really, I suppose, realise it until I hear the list. But I think there were still little things that I didn't achieve. I played in a Rugby 15s World Cup, but I didn't win one. And I was set to go to the 2017 one, got injured, didn't go along to that one. Olympics, trained those 4 years as a contracted athlete, didn't make it to the Olympics. And losing those last 2 World Cups for the Rugby League were always, a real thorn in my side, because I'd been a part of the team that had won the first 2. My first 2 I'd won, then lost the next 2. And then so this year, when I was sort of planning to actually play in one more, I thought, I can, I suppose, imbalance tip the scale there and sort of get 3 on 2. But it wasn't to be. I mean, winning the 9s one was pretty cool last year, but there's always something, you're sort of never really quite satisfied, and whether it be through injury or your own actual performance, or a coach just didn't like you or whatever, there's always something that you kind of live with a little bit of regret, I suppose.
Isn't that amazing, Steve? We often off microphone talk about it, about the mindset of some of the people that we have on the podcast. I hear that list and I'm like, that is amazing. I'm probably at the end of it having a cigar and just looking back and going, oh, what an amazing career. Versus your mindset, which is going, I wish I'd done this. I wish I could have done this. I would have loved to have won this more. And I guess that kind of is testament to why your career was so long as well, because you had that burning desire. Yeah,
I think I used to get really frustrated when people would say things like, oh, you're a legend, or a couple of coaches in probably the last 5 years would always say to me, oh, you're a long time retired. And I was like, I'll decide when I retire, and I'll make sure, that if I'm not up to my own standard in terms of my performance, I'll pull myself out before you get the opportunity to pull me out, So that used to annoy me, because they would focus on my age versus my actual ability. Just not everyone, but there was just a few, handful of coaches that would kind of think, oh, how are you still defying these odds? And, we'll just remind you of your age kind of thing. I was like, I don't need reminding. I know exactly when my birthday is kind of thing. So that would be quite frustrating. And then I'd almost use that as fuel to be like, yeah, I'll show you. And whether they said it to me at a training pitch and then I'd go out and play one of my best games, was a little way for me to be like, don't underestimate me, don't underestimate what I can do, because I'll know personally when I can't do it. And that's exactly why I retired, because probably in my last test match in October last year against Samoa, we had a good win and our team played so well, but it was a big factor in why I retired. Probably post leading into that game, there was lots of I suppose signs that I was going to lean that way, but actually when I played that last game, I knew, yes, this is my time. Like, I wasn't the same player that I had been, or even the player that I kind of still wanted to be. Like, I knew as I aged, like, I was never gonna, I suppose, get any faster, or, and so I sort of tried to change and adapt my game to suit, and also adapt a lot of my trainings and what I was doing to kind of get that longevity. But to me, I still wanted to I suppose, be good at what my strengths were and still improve on what my weaknesses were. And when I knew I wasn't quite hitting those targets, then I knew, sweet, time to tap out now. Physically, I just can't do these things anymore to the standard that I wanted. Yeah.
One of the quotes, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think it was suggested that your career peaked, or you're at your best sort of 32 to 37, which is incredible. What do you put that down to? Mindset, because we never, once I sort of got to that 30-year age, it was all amateur. It was all amateur right till I was sort of 31, 32 when we started sort of getting day allowances for camps and things like that. And so, but once you sort of kind of got into that semi-professional area, then you started to get things like team nutritionists, team physios, team psychologists, and that, I think, was the point of difference for me, was having a team psychologist. And my first one was David Galbraith, and most of the times I caught up with DG was all about off-field stuff. And it was like, once he cleaned up all the stuff that was happening for me off-field, whether it was, I was a mum already, whether it was family stuff, or whether it was, how I probably perceived myself, my own self-awareness, once he sort of helped me to figure out that stuff and how I was actually, what was going on in my head, it just, I just shot off in terms of my physical abilities and what I could do on the field. And it was a huge part of that, I reckon, and that's why I peaked when I did. I really thought I had peaked at, at the, I suppose, maybe the 2013 World Cup, because I'd done the Sevens World Cup and literally gone on plane and went straight to the League World Cup. So I thought that was my pinnacle, but that was probably the start, and then it kind of just improved from there. So yeah, that's incredible insight about the psychologist. How many times a week would you meet with him? Was it a daily sort of thing?
When we were in camp, so he was just in camp with us. It was even just like having breakfast with him or wherever, we just caught up. But because he's based here and I already knew his wife, so I just flick him a text, say, hey, look, I've got this on my mind, can we catch up? Yep, let's go for coffee. So it was really relaxed, and I don't know, he just had this way about how he would always talk about making the cake, and the icing is what everyone sees, sort of like the iceberg, thing, and it was all about making the cake, and the icing on top was just the wins and what everyone else saw. And it always used to stick with me, always used to talk about above the line and below the line. Or for me, he taught me, because my biggest probably downfall was that I was never the fittest and never even tried to be the fittest. I just relied on what I was good at. And so in order to get me through some of those pretty extreme sevens trainings, he would teach me this thing about jumping off the cliff, when I knew I was absolutely gone and legs were giving out and, I was ready to spew all over the field. That was my moment to then jump off the cliff and go a little bit further. And so that's kind of what I attuned in my head. So when I'd actually I wasn't afraid to then get myself to that point. I was actually aiming for that point. So anything past that was always going to be an improvement, even if it was only like one more 80, 60, 40. Those were our things that our coach copied off bloody Titch. And those years for our initial years through the sevens, and we had Sean Horan as our coach. And, him and Titch were pretty tight, and we sort of, for a lot of it, mimicked what the boys done, but that also meant we had to, they were mimicking, their standards and their targets that they had to hit, and I was just, unrealistic, but, but we had to go through it anyway, because we were all in that learning phase, so it was well, you got to do it, kind of thing, so it was tough. It was real tough.
That fitness side of it you talk about, not being the fittest and never being the fittest, is that evident, or is that kind of were your test results below other people, or is it just kind of something that you sensed? Because I'm picking to be at that level for so long, you're still pretty fit.
Yeah, a bit of both, to be honest. It's something that I always knew. In all honesty, I really hated running, but I loved sprinting. So I was well aware of what my strengths were and what my point of difference was in the team, or where I added value to the team. And it was always either my speed, my fend, my size, that I knew I was powerful and explosive. But in terms of running up and down the field continuously, I just knew I was just not that player, So if I was to compare myself to players who played in different positions, that was their expectation, then I was way off the bandwagon. But when you looked at players that were in similar position to me that had similar attributes, then I wasn't too bad. But when you're in a contracting system and there's 20 girls and you're competing for 12 spots, it made a big difference in the game of sevens when you weren't hitting the target for a Bronco, or you weren't hitting the target for a big test. Then you go out and play a trial match and run in 3 or 4 tries to save your ass, to hopefully the coach forgot about the conditioning, test that you maybe didn't hit those targets for. So it was sort of a balancing act. I think the good coaches, they got it and they worked around it, and some coaches were just like, no, you didn't hit it. You're out.
Now there's so much to unpack.
Yes.
And we'll jump all over the place. So
cool.
we've already in that opening kind of stanza, we've covered a whole bunch of stuff. It was your birthday this week.
Yeah.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
You've referenced something before, which was your birth certificate and bits and pieces. Now, how much truth is there to you growing up in Putaruru as Honey Hunter?
Yeah.
And is it correct that you, and I've got to get this right, you found out your legal name is Aneta Hireme after trying to go for your license as a teenager?
Yeah.
How's that? So how's that?
It's 100% correct. So my legal name is Aneta Honey Hireme. My dad's surname is Hunter, and my brother goes under Hunter. And so when I went to school, for some reason everyone just called me Honey. So I went by my middle name, and then I went to school as Honey Hunter. And I think maybe as a kid I'd seen my birth certificate at some point before and sort of looked at it, but sort of took no notice until I kind of got to high school, 15 or whatever. And then, they said, oh, well, you got to bring your birth certificate so you can get your license and stuff. So I took it and just looked at it and thought, oh yeah, that's my name, and gave it to them and filled out my forms as Honey Hunt. And they're like, well, no, this doesn't work. Your name is Aneta Hireme and this is a totally different person. And I was like, oh, yeah, shit, So I literally went back that day and I said to Dad, oh, look, you need to go to, they said you've got to go to the court and change my name on a stat deck or something, and you've got to pay the whatever it was back then. And I don't even know how much it was. And my dad was like, oh, F that. I'm not wasting my bloody money on that sort of thing, because he's a real stubborn dude. And so I was like, oh, sweet. So I just went and got my license and just put it under Aneta Hireme. And then just as different things evolved, my school records needed to be changed, and then eventually I just almost, changed identity. I still kept the honey, but then I became Honey Hireme. And I think interesting fact is that a lot of people, I had a pretty tough childhood, and there was parts where me and my dad, we really clashed. And it was common knowledge back home, everyone knew, we were so similar, so we clashed a lot. And there was one time around that time where him and I had a massive falling out. So people thought that I went and changed my name to go under my mum's name. I was like, no, it's just always been like that. Yeah, so
what's on the Order of New Zealand Merit? Do you get a certificate?
Yeah.
And what does that say?
It says, oh, that's a good point. I think it says Honey Hireme-Smiler. Yeah, so I've never gone back to the Hunter name.
Okay.
But in saying that, to help my dad get over that, that phase, because I know he totally regrets it now, is that when I had my son, and he asked that if he was a boy, could we put him under Hunter? And I was like, yeah, absolutely, Dad, because all his other grandchildren before my son were all girls, so he knew the name was going to change. So I was like, yeah. So my son carries the Hunter name, but not me.
So the Honey Bill stuff, I understand that came from a throwaway comment you made and someone picked up and ran with it. Is that the story?
A journalist, a reporter in a newspaper wrote it in there. So she was, it was the South Waikato newspaper at the time, and I was in town. I was in Pataru, and I don't know what it was, like some sort of gala day in town, and we were selling sausages. Me and my teammates were selling sausages for, I think it was a netball fundraiser or something like that. And then she asked for, like, she took a photo, and we were all, holding the tongs and cooking sausages on the barbecue thing. And she asked for our names, and as a joke, that's what I gave her. And then, like, literally 2 days later, it's in the paper, and so we're all, like, laughing about it, like, how did this lady get this wrong?
But it stuck, right?
It did, it stuck, so...
And you played with Sonny Bill's sister in the 70s? Did she bring that up and go, hey, come on, what are you doing?
No, well, I think it was quite public then, like, there was already a million stories out, and I think, he's commented on, and I've commented on it heaps. I mean, he was in the Sevens at the same time too, and in fact, Liam Messon was coaching us for the university club team that were our women's side, and he had brought Sonny along to a couple of trainings and that when they were playing for the Chiefs, and so it was just kind of a joke really, and I sort of didn't care too much about it after that. Newspapers just picked it up and ran with it. I was like, okay, I'll be that then.
Yeah. I'm quite keen to talk about your upbringing in Putaru. It sounds like, and as much as you're willing to talk about a difficult childhood, you often find like these incredibly strong, resilient characters come from difficult upbringings. Do you think that formed the platform for the career and the life that you've had?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I think it was rough, but it was awesome, and I probably wouldn't change it for a thing, because for me, I had an amazing family, but we were probably your stereotypical mum, dad, me and my brother in the house, domestic violence ran rampant through our house, lots of alcohol, things like that. But on the flip side, with the alcohol and the violence gone, we're actually super, super loving. Like, my mum's one of 11, and we all lived in the same town, so we actually had a really tight unit, and our grandparents were amazing on both sides. Even on my dad's side, my family was really amazing too. It was just that real difficult time, and it was almost like now when I can look back and talk to Dad about it, it was just passed down. It was just the way it was, sort of thing, and it was tough. It was really tough, to see the violence that would happen in our house, between my mum and dad, or between my dad and us kids, and it was really tough. But I think it made me quite an angry child. And so picking up rugby league, from the age of 5 was really easy to do, because I was an angry child. And then I grew into an angry teenager, and that kind of filtered through. And, it's no secret back home that I was the school bully, and I was really hardened from that part of my upbringing, although I had this other whole side of me. It was probably, say, if I was to, give it a percentage, it was probably 30% of my upbringing, but I had this massive other side that also pulled me the other way and was just filled with love and everything else. So, but it was something that stuck with me, and it, if anything, it did quite harden me, but it also made me, I suppose, sports was my outlet, where I took that frustration out on. So it really helped me lead my way into sports, and and then even through my teenage years, I mean, I was such a little shit. I love it when I run into my school teacher and they're like, "You are such a little shit," and I was a little punk. I got like suspended from school twice, and I was just like this real little mongrel, and everyone back home, they always joke about it. Well, obviously I've just had my birthday, and it was a surprise 40th, and like heaps of people from Pataru showed up to it, and all the stories they talked about was me being a little punk, and I was just like, oh my gosh, shut up. So it was quite a hard case, but I loved it, and I don't shy away from that, because that's who made me the person, what's made me the person that I am today, was to have to go through that. And I always think back, I always never forget the moment I ended up in court. I'd been in a fight with this girl, and I hadn't been in a fight, I'd beaten this girl up, and I ended up in court, and I was standing in front of this judge, and I was lucky I got, what do you call, diversion or whatever, but I had to, I had to pay for her teeth, because it was quite bad and things like that. And I just remember thinking that moment in my life was probably a real turning point for me, because it was, not long after that, my parents shipped me off to Aussie. I had to start working. I got homesick real bad. I came back and almost sort of turned my life around. I went back to school. That last year, ended up head girl and was thriving in my sport. Wow. It was a real transformation. I needed that reality check, and then that's kind of where then my sports just took over from the other side of life, I suppose, that I was choosing at the time, that 15, 16 and 17 bracket of, those years I was rough. And then once I got sort of sent off and then begged to come back, and I said, well, that's your chance, you come back. And I've just flipped it all around. So
Did you have any mentors or guidance during those tough years when there was trouble at home, and was anyone aware of that and helped guide you and could see that you were this punk kid or whatever, but could see there was goodness in there and tried to pull it out?
Yeah, I had heaps, to be honest, within my family, and everyone knew, because Pataru's a small town, everyone knew our family and what was going on. And there was people that sort of just were like, nah, she's done, she's gone that way 100%. And then there were others that just kind of got it, sort of thing. I actually had this really cool athletics coach, and he was the youth aid officer. he was a cop, Neil Webb, and he kind of knew what I could do in sport, but he also pulled me over to athletics, and he was already coaching two of my cousins who are good runners. I mean, my cousin Corey Chase was a New Zealand runner, and then my other cousin Hayden Hireme, he played, Waikato and all of that, he was running for him too. So then they kind of pulled me in, and so, I kind of saw a different side of sport, and he was super caring, although he had already known, 2 weeks ago he'd pulled me out of a cells and sort of thing. Now he's come up to the track and run with us and things like that. So he's sort of one example, but there was tons, even within my family. My grandmother, my grandfather were huge in my upbringing. I spent a lot of time living with them. My grandmother was actually Jehovah's Witness. So as a kid, we actually attended quite a bit of that well, they didn't call it church, they called them meetings. And so I sort of had a little bit of a base upbringing in terms of religion with that too. And I always thought that helped ground me to a certain extent, because although I didn't continue to follow the religion, it gave me, I suppose, a perspective of respect for people that have a belief in different things in terms of religion. And it definitely gave me a respect for Jehovah's Witness, because I had a massive understanding of it and what they believed in. For me, I didn't like not getting Christmas presents or birthday presents, but that was sort of my level of intellect at that time. It was real sort of sort of topsy-turvy kind of upbringing, and there was some real tough moments, but again there was some pretty amazing moments as well.
Were you a disciplined athlete? So while outside of sport you were having trouble, when you got to the field or when you got to the athletics track, were you zeroed in on what you needed to do?
Yeah, I was all about winning. So discipline to a sense, but probably more I was competitive, and I only ever played to win, and everyone knew that I had to win at everything. And that was whether I was playing a schoolgirls game of rugby, a women's rugby league game, or I was, playing in the pool at home with my brother. I had to win at everything. And so, that was just the mindset that I had, and I was a pretty bad loser too. Even if we played Friday night touch back home, and we just had a social team of girls, but as soon as we were all girls, we were the only girls team, and every other team was sort of either mixed or boys, but I had to win those games. It didn't matter that they were a full boys team and they were really, really good. I had to win it, and I'd be super frustrated if we didn't. So
was teenage Honey at the Putararu Athletics Day, are you winning the 100 metre, the 200 metre, the 400, the 800?
Shot
are you cleaning up across the board?
All of the ones you mentioned, except the 400 and the 800, because I never did long distance, and 400 to me was long distance. I was literally that. I was the rock up. Everybody else has spikes and starting blocks. I'm in bare feet and standing there in my, with no blocks or anything, and I'm winning the races. Yeah. I remember I was fifth form, and there was a girl in the seventh form who was the top senior girl runner, and I knew for some reason I hadn't really beaten her in the past, but I knew that day like I was running really well, and I was just like, nah, so I put myself up a grade specifically to beat her, and I did. And I was only in the intermediate girls, and I wanted to beat this girl, knowing it was her last year, just to appease myself.
You got to be like world famous in Putararu at this point, right? Like small town, everyone's got to know like who you are.
Real interesting point. We had Tim Wigmore, an author, at the start of this year, who spoke about, he used an Australian example of how small towns generate amazing athletes. Putararu itself, there's been a hell of a lot of good athletes that come out of there, right? Do you think it's that small town kind of mentality? And are you the biggest fish in that pond, or are there bigger fish that come back now?
Oh, hard to say. I absolutely think that small town mentality, like, when I look across, not just Putararu, but also Tukuroa, that's South Waikato, we've had a ton of talent come out of that. And whether it's, like Tukuroa, for example, like it was normal for us to be training in the frost at 6 p.m. at night at rugby or league trainings because there was already frost on the ground and we had no shoes on, So whether that just hardened us and that was our normal, maybe that's what sort of helped us, I suppose. I don't know. There's a number of things I think that contribute to those small town athletes that come out. But like I can name probably 20 other people that I actually thought were better than me or just as good as me growing up, whether they were male or female, that didn't quite make it out of that small town mentality. There's tons back home that I can name that were just as good, with me growing up. But, only sort of a few kind of make it that far. They get stuck in that small town mentality or life just kind of takes over.
Was Bull Rush a big part of your upbringing?
Bull Rush is the number one game back at our marae, and they don't care who you are, It's funny actually at my 40th in the weekend, that was the story all the cousins told us, like, that's where they kind of found me out, because they knew as I was getting older, that I was quite a decent player. These are my boy cousins, so Bull Rush was where they could kind of get me back. And then one of my older cousins was telling a story, how he purposely pinpointed me. He's like, I pick Honey, because it's like, this is my moment. And then he's like, and then I just flattened him or whatever. And he's just like, he never ever did it again. And it sort of sent a message to the rest of my cousins and my brothers, like, don't mess with me. Like, I'll foot it with you, because that's just what drove me. It was like, you almost saw, I think I had a lot of wanting to be in that boys' club. I had a lot of girl mates and stuff, but I always, I was always trying to prove to them that I was just as good as them, if not better, kind of thing. So
that schoolyard pick can be quite unforgiving, right?
Yeah.
Stevens had the opposite of that, where he came back to our football club and he underplays it. He's a very, very good football player, but the team's quite young. So they did the schoolyard pick. Yeah, I take you. And he was the last one. And I think it was quite humbling for him to be the last pick. Were you the opposite? Were you the first picked?
I think the biggest memory that I remember of that whole, name the two captains, was actually schoolboys reps, and I was like under 13s, and we're at rep training, and they said, I'm going to split you into teams. They picked two captains, two of the biggest boys, and they literally were, pick Honey. No, I'm picking her first. And I was like, oh shit, like they're scrapping over me, and this is rep boys rugby. So for me, that was like, I never forget it. I was like, these guys are scrapping over, and like, they were kind of our captains. They were a year older than me. They were a bit bigger and stuff. And I just remember thinking, and I catch up with them now and again or on Facebook, and they always like remember, those days of playing against us. So for me, that was cool. That was kind of validation for me. Like, they're not picking. They're not picking me because I'm a girl. They're trying to pick me because they know I'm a good player, So that was probably pretty key.
We talked about the mentors and people who've helped you through. Did you have female role models when you were this sort of challenged, difficult period, and you were excelling at sport? And was there anyone out there that you really could look up to and aspire to be like?
Oh, probably just some of the local women, because I had to jump into women's rugby league quite early. I think I was 13 when I was, kicked out of the boys, and then had to. And back then they didn't have the age groups, and I was a decent size. I was actually quite a big teenager. So I went straight into the women's game. And there was probably some of the local, I got to know all the, we played in the Waikato Bay of Plenty comp, so there was quite a few throughout my career that helped me, but some of the, there was sort of two key, I suppose, women back home, Annie Brown and Susie Lowe, who were probably like the best players in Pataru at the time when I came through. So it was kind of them that kind of helped pull me through, and Annie's husband was our coach, and he obviously saw potential, but they all knew I was a little shit too, so they kind of helped me out. And so there was like a lot of them, but then not necessarily. I was still in the era of like looking up to the Dean Bowes, the Ruben Wickies, the Stacey Jones, because that's all I ever saw on TV. Those were who I had on my walls, was all males on my walls in terms of posters and things like that. There was no sort of woman until I remember my first probably insight into a female athlete was actually Valerie Adams. And I ran into her. She's young. I think she's a couple of years younger than me. But I ran into her into Elevator. She was being nominated for the Halberg, like the junior sportswoman. And I was down in Wellington for work, for whatever. And she ended up in the lift with me. And I knew that those awards were on. I didn't know a lot about the Halberg Awards back then. But I just happened to end up in a lift with her. And I remember thinking, oh, you're a giant. Like, looking up at her. But I just remember thinking, you're the only woman that I've seen on TV that I could aspire to be like, sort of thing. And so it was interesting.
And then playing women's rugby league, senior women's rugby league, on the weekend, and then on the Monday you go back to school. What's that interaction like? Because are you, like, it's adults, right? You're not going with adults on the weekend, all that's happening, and then you've got to go back into school. That must have maybe played a part in some of that rebellious.
It did.
You do what you want on the weekend, and then someone's telling you, do this, do that, and you're going, well, hang on. I was with people your age on the weekend. And I was doing completely the opposite. So who the hell are you to tell me what to do? Yeah,
exactly. It made me, like I was your typical 15-year-old trying to act like a 21-year-old. And that's exactly what happened. And funny story, my family know it. So I was this 16, 17-year-old, and I'd go play. And one day we had this game, and we were on a team bus. We went over to Rotorua, we were playing Pikiao. We won that game, and then on the team bus, they all jumped on the team bus, and everyone was drinking on the way home. And I'm like, I'm having a few drinks. And they went back to one of the ladies' house and had a few drinks there. And they said, all right, let's all go to the pub. And I was like, I'm not allowed in the pub, sort of thing. And my auntie worked at the pub. And I was like, I was like, well, if I sneak, and they were like, we'll sneak you in. Okay, cool. So they sneak me in, and I stand out like a sore thumb because everyone knows who the hell I am in town. But my dad was there. He was in the pub. So at first, like, my initial reaction was like, him and I were sort of in one of those not great moments. I was like, and I'm sort of half drunk anyway. So I'm just like, whatever, he's not going to do anything. So I go down the one end of the pub with my team and the girls, and they're like, your dad's here, I was like, don't worry about him, sort of thing. And then he told one of the ladies, or, said, tell that kid to get out of here. And I was like, nah, I'm not moving, And so he just stayed there. Anyway, I watched him, and he went over to the phone, and I was like, what's he doing on the phone? I was like, he's going home, sort of thing. And my auntie who worked on the bar still hadn't seen me in there. So I thought I was like away, sort of thing. And then my dad kind of disappeared, and I was like, he did go home, sweet, sort of thing. So I'm standing down the end of the pub. And in the Pataru pub, we call it the Trough, there's only like sort of one main entrance, and it's a double sort of flappy door. So I was standing there, and then just when the sort of music went down, you just saw these two doors come flying open, and in steps my mum in her nightie gown and her slippers. And like, my mum's the softest person in the world, but when she's angry, you just do not mess with her. And she just and I just took one look at her, and everyone saw her, and she just looked at me and goes, get your effing ass in the car now. And I was just like, and I just grabbed my bag, like put everything down, and I was gone. Like there was just no way I was gonna like think. And I just remember I sat in the back of the car on the trip home. I was like, oh my God. And my cousins remind me of it all the time. Like, you know, mum was the soft one growing up, and so she'd never do something like that. So if she did it, you know, you knew you were in the wrong. So yeah, it wasn't my proudest moment.
I'd love if it's okay to talk about your mum.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the stuff I've read suggests she had a huge part in the person you've become, in your life and in your career. And she passed a couple of years ago, 2019.
Yeah.
Is it? And I understand it was quite quick. It was 9 weeks, I think, from diagnosis to when she passed. Able to talk to us about that period and how it affected you and how you got through it?
Yeah, so it was it seemed like it was quite fast, but not, you know. So I was the Saturday prior. We had played. Me and my wife, we played an opposing team. So she plays for Old Boys, and I was playing for Melville, and I was a player coach for Melville. And this was just like 16 months. 2019, and so we'd made it in the finals, and the final was on the stadium at Waikato Stadium, and so Mum was in the stadium that day, and she watched us, and you know Melville won and things like that, and we come off the field, my wife and I, and Mum got the photo of us in our uniforms, and we were sort of agreeing then that was kind of going to be our last season as players. And then Mum went home that night, we went out with our teams and stuff, and then we came home, and then anyway, the next morning I'd left our truck at Melville, which was just around the corner, and we're walking around, and Mum pulls up in the car and she says, look, I'm going to check myself into the hospital, I'm not feeling well. And she had sort of been suffering from sort of sore stomachs and little things like that, sort of maybe 2 to 3 weeks prior, and been going to the doctors, and they're just kind of giving her sort of pain medication. So I said, yeah, I think you should, because it's been going on for, a few weeks now. Because Mum's super fit, she's quite small in frame, but super fit. She'd been doing all these marathons and things. And so she went in, and then, she was, and then they admitted her, they ran a few tests, and within like 4 days, they pretty much, of her being in there, they sort of were like, we don't know what's going on. And then they just kind of said, oh shit, we know what's going on. It's actually really, really bad. And we're like, oh, okay. And then, in the space of sort of 2 weeks, within that same 2 weeks, it was like 4 operations. And then it was like, you're in palliative care, and it was like, whoa, hold on. She's only like 63. She's super fit. She eats so well. Like, this can't be it. And they were like, it is, like, it's that bad. So then the next sort of, probably 6 weeks after that was like watching someone just deteriorate so quickly, and it was super quick. I mean, she probably only spent out of that 9 weeks, maybe 5-6 of it in between our home here in Hamilton and hospital, in and out, because it was just constant complications. So in the end, we just moved into the hospital, and they let me stay in there. They got me with a mattress on the floor. Although we lived around the corner, I was like, nah, I'm not leaving. So I slept in there with her, and then and typical our family, just pretty much all migrated and came into my house. All her brothers and sisters almost like stopped work for that moment in time, and then she chose to go back home to Pataru, to our family homestead, and spend her last weeks there, which ended up just being 2 weeks really, and then she passed. So for me, it was huge. It was tough. I'm the eldest of my mum and dad's kids, so that was super tough to just watch, because Mum's the eldest of her siblings, so she was kind of like that matriarch of the family too. So to watch all her brothers and sisters, really suffer, and my brother's suffering, it was just tough. And she was so close with, because our family's so tight, all my first cousins, and there's a lot of us, we were all like brothers and sisters. So it was just, such a difficult time. And when we went to like palliative care, and we actually took her home, I had to take on full like administering of all her medication, and that was like just a real whirlwind, because it was like literally constantly needing to inject her with whatever it is, whatever symptoms she was going through. And then that sort of only lasted for so long, and then she kind of went, drifted into this coma, and then there was no communication. She didn't last long after that, but I must admit, it was a real peaceful last moments for her, which is all we kind of wanted, because everything had been so accelerated in terms of her deterioration that actually she did get that moment to sort of be at peace and have that little bit less suffering. For us, it was huge. It was a huge turning point, I think, in my life, and realising how important Mum had been. Mum had been living up here with me for the last 5 years. Her and my dad had parted, and she'd been living with us, and so we'd really become quite close in that time. And so for that to happen so quick, it was just real far out.
What lessons did you learn about strength of character from your mum when she realised sort of the path that she was on and her sort of conviction of dealing with it?
First and foremost was just the acceptance, the acceptance of it, which took her, not even a day, and then for me it was all about her, which was her, my whole life was all about serving others, so throughout the whole thing she was very clear that she didn't want people to suffer from this and seeing her in that way. So she was all about, no, I want people to be positive, I want you to accept this, and I want you to be as happy as you kind of could, sort of thing. And I was like, she just, right throughout her whole illness, she just constantly wanted to make sure that person was okay and that person was okay. I was like, Mum, you just need to worry about yourself right now and be as strong as you can. But she didn't. She still continued to put other people first. And I thought, that was huge for me to see her do that, and lots of, the write-ups and things about it was about how I put my life on hold in terms of my sport and my contracts with Warriors and things like that. But I was like, look what this lady's doing, that compares nothing. This is a moment in time. This is her last moments of time, and she still continues to care for others. So for me, that was probably the biggest thing, was how well she took the news, how she fought to a point where she kind of knew this wasn't going to be a losing battle, and then she became all about ensuring everybody else was going to be okay while she was there and while she wasn't there. So
did you becoming kind of that caring, or taking that caring role, was that a natural kind of family hierarchy, you being the eldest, or was that just circumstance, or did you just take it upon yourself thinking, I've got to do this?
Both. It was definitely a hierarchy thing, because I was just like, no one else is going to do this. I am 100% doing this for my mum. And if things were different, maybe if it was my dad, then it would probably be, sort of a cultural thing. It'd probably be my brother kind of thing. So so it was that, and it was my own, I knew that was the right place for me to be, and that's where I really wanted to be. I just did not care what else was going on in my life and in my world, and I turned down so many things, but I was just like, nah, I don't care. This is my absolute priority. And my main drive for it was I just did not want to live with regret or miss out on any living minute, really, that I didn't have to be sleeping up at the hospital, because the nurses and that were great up there, but I wasn't going to miss anything that may or may not happen overnight. I had to be there, and the nurses were like, oh look, we can do this, we can do that. I was like, no, I will do who cares, I will wash my mum, I will do all of that, I just need you to give her the medicine or whatever. So I think that's a cultural thing too.
It's interesting because you just assume it, right? No one says, hey honey, you're going to do this and you're going to do this and you're going to do this. You've kind of, throughout however you've made it, you've kind of assumed these roles, and that's just what happens. And
I think that for me it was always about ensuring my mum had dignity, right throughout the whole process, because some of the operations and the things, that the complications that she had and all of that was always about, my mum was always a woman of, holding herself with, great pride and dignity, but very compassionate and caring in that sense. So that was, for me, I was like, this is how I uphold my mum's mana in terms of ensuring that she goes with that dignity as well.
Is it true you're out, I guess you need an outlet during that time as well. You were using the hospital stairs to do training and workouts and things.
Yeah, I needed that outlet, because there was some real difficult times, and I never really wanted my mum to see me cry. There was moments where, you just had to, but for me, the training in between, whether she was sleeping or whatever, and I'd go, I'd only give myself an hour to 2 hours a day to get out and train, and it was like, I didn't even want to go as far as my gym's only in Dinsdale. It wasn't that far anyway, but I was like, nah, I'm just gonna make do with what's here. And so it was stairs, or it was car parks, and I'm sure all the cars at the car park were like so frustrated with me, so I'm just like running around, and they're like, oh shit, like what's this crazy girl doing running around the car park and things like that. But yeah, I just made do, and I was so fit, and I was so super fit during that time. I was like, geez. The other thing was that, I suppose that I held on to a little bit of hope that she may actually recover, and I may actually still get to go play for the Warriors. So for me, it was all in preparation, like, things are going to go okay. I was probably still very much in denial in that stage, and, and then I'm going to go off and play, and, sort of things like that. As it turned out, obviously she did pass, and then the World Cup sort of came up, and I was ready to go for it. Physically, I was super ready, and I was so fit at the time, so it kind of panned out, I suppose.
Well, thank you for sharing that.
Well, before we leave it, and your wife Rochelle, or between you made the decision to move your wedding forward.
Oh yeah.
And you had it at the hospital as well.
Yeah. So our wedding kind of almost gets overshadowed by it, and I always probably forget actually about the wedding. And oh man, like I have this amazing wife because I did absolutely nothing in terms of preparation for this wedding. So it was actually Mum that sort of hinted to Rochelle, and then when Rochelle brought it up, I thought absolutely, because we'd already set a date in February. We knew Mum wasn't going to make it till then, so we sort of thought, yeah, absolutely. And Rochelle's like, look, we've got to have your Mum there. Should we do this? I was like, yep, let's do it, but you're doing it because I'm looking after Mum. And she was like, yep, cool. So she literally organised everything, and we only had 2 weeks because, Mum was sort of shifting into taking her home after that. And so we had 2 weeks, and like, honestly, every day I kept saying to Rochelle, get ready to cancel everything, because I just thought like it might just be on the day where Mum's super, super sick, and then I was willing to cancel it on the day. I just did not, I was so focused on Mum. So when the actual day came, it was super funny. Me and Mum woke up in the morning. I still slept the night at the hospital. Woke up in the morning, and Mum, she'd wake up at real random hours, and so she flicks on the TV and da-da-da, and I'm like, really, Mum, I've got my wedding today, and we're going to watch TV at 4 in the morning. So she starts watching it, and then she goes, oh, are you awake? And I said, yeah, I'm awake. And she goes, oh, you better get some sleep, because I just remembered it's your wedding today. I was just like, yeah, well, we've been awake for 2 hours now, but okay. And then so anyway, like, the dress shows up. I haven't even tried it on, I just was like, oh, hopefully it fits, and it just happened.
Where do you get ready at the hospital?
So this is how cool the hospital were. The ward literally turned my mum's room into like our dressing room. So they bought all me and my mum's clothes up. They let our makeup lady set up in one of the whānau rooms. So she did like my mum's makeup, my makeup, my 2 nieces' makeups in the whānau room. Then she let my side of the wedding party actually come up and take over the rest of so we literally had this like wedding, pre-wedding stuff happen in the whānau room in the ward. And then the nurses were like, help prepare Mum so that we could get her downstairs. And then they stood in the aisles and clapped us as we walked down the aisles. Like, oh my God, this is hilarious. And it was actually the hospital staff that suggested, because initially we were going to go up to the lake, and we had sort of booked this garden area there, but then they were like, oh, look, it's going to be tough to get her out of the hospital. Would you consider having it in the hospital? I was like, where? And they were like, well, we've got a chapel. And I was like, oh, yeah, true. And they said, go and talk to the chaplain. Goes, yeah, absolutely. We usually have meditation on a Friday, but we'll clear it out for you. And how many guests you like? So everyone just made it happen. It was just random how it all fell into place. And so I honestly would admit that I didn't actually realise, what was kind of going on until there's 2 entrances. So we had decided that we'd stand at each entrance and sort of walk in together. And it was my dad and my son walked me in, and Rochelle's 2 sons walked her in, and then meet at the middle. And it was literally when we actually started to walk in, and I seen her, and I was like, shit, we're actually getting married right now. Like, this is really happening. But it was awesome. We had sort of thought, well, we'll do this, but then have probably like the real bigger wedding, in February. But actually, that day was just so perfect. We just thought, no, that was perfect for us, So it was cool. It was super cool. I wouldn't change it for the world.
It reminded me, one of my best friends passed of cancer, and when she was terminal, brought her wedding forward. So she passed about 2 weeks after her wedding. And it was an insanely emotional day. It was this crazy mix of absolute happiness and joy tinged with desperate sadness. And one of the bravest things I've ever seen is the bridesmaid Paula, her best friend, giving a speech. And man, it was hard. But she did it and she got through it, and I'll never forget it. Were there emotions in the speeches? That must have been tricky.
Yeah, there was emotions right throughout the room, at the time my nan was quite sick too, and she was in another ward, so they'd actually wheeled my mum down from one ward and my nan down in another ward, so we had actually had spaces for both of them in their wheelchairs, right at the front. And it was the first time for a lot of people, and we didn't have many there because it was only the hospital chaplain, so we could probably only squeeze, I think they told us 40, but we squeezed like 60 in there. But it was the first time for a lot of people to see my mum, and so you could just see the teary eyes in them, and as much as the occasion, like you say, was super happy. It was almost like the moment he said, "Okay, you're married," turned around, had a couple of photos. Straight away I looked at Mum and I could tell she was like overwhelmed by the whole thing and trying really hard to be okay, but I knew she needed to go back to her room, so I just I just almost switched straight away, like, okay, bye wife, like I've actually got to deal with this, and I went straight to my mum, like, are you okay? She's like, I'm really sorry, I need to, and I said, no, I know you knew, I could tell, just by almost looking at her, so people sort of didn't even, get any really, because lots of people were sort of coming up to her too, so she was just like, this is a bit much, and I could see she was starting to sort of deteriorate. So I was like, no, we've got to get her back up into the room. So, there was definitely those moments, but Mum was just so proud. And I think what was the hardest part was seeing Mum cry. And I knew there were tears of joy, but mixed in with tears of sadness as well. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. We're going to switch gears, move in a different direction. One of your friends, Chelsea Alley, prominent Black Fern, has made a really powerful Instagram post this week, which has gone viral. It's captured the attention of certainly my social sphere, sort of in the background of the Blues v Chiefs Super Rugby women's game last weekend. And I'm just going to read some parts of what she says, and then I'll get you to reflect on it. So her post says, last week was a massive win for some of us as women's rugby players, a historic occasion, one that past and present players have been working towards for many years. However, the reality of the way we live, train and survive has hit me more than usual this week. I am struggling. It's quite a long post, but she goes on to talk about sort of the highs of playing the game, but then the reality of what her life looks like after the lights fade, and then she talks about the sort of resources or lack of support around the reality of women's rugby. And she finishes by saying, I'm also tired of being told to just be grateful. When do we get to stand up and say that we deserve more without being made to feel like we're demanding and unappreciative? So talk me about that post. When did you read it, and does it resonate with you, and what do you feel about it?
Yeah, I mean, 100% it resonates with me. I think, she's speaking her truth, but also every single other player that's been in her shoes and worn the jerseys that she's worn. And she mentions, that she's been a club player, now a Super Rugby player, FPC player, and a Black Fern, so she's worn all the jerseys that you can. And I love it. I literally texted her and said that I was so proud of her, that she's had the courage to actually speak up and be, bring it out in the open, because we've talked about it for years, and there's been, you have to acknowledge that there's been some massive growth and things like that. And she talks about, the love of the game, that we've been doing it, and that, we're constantly told, be grateful, think about the past players and what they've done for you. And we always do. We're always acknowledging the legacy that's been in the pathway that's been paved for players. But, in terms of, they continue to say, we play for the love of the game, we play for the love of the game. I think she's 100% right in that when you're playing at that professional level and you're given those expectations to be a high performance player, when is the game actually going to love you back in terms of helping you, whether it's financially or resources and things like that. And she's not just talking about pay parity, she's talking about a lot of other things that go on in the women's game that people just, see the highlights or see the game and the fronting and the media only showing the great parts of it. But there's lots of other things that kind of go on in the backgrounds, that just small things like, for example, just a petrol voucher for people that are travelling out of town to get to training on time, who's a uni student who are already struggling but expected to be at, 4 trainings a week, or the mum, just something that may be able to help with childcare, or actually having an environment where you can actually bring your kids along, because otherwise you've got no one else to look after them. So which means you then can't make training, which then, guilt is put on you because then you're not at training, kind of thing. So there's so many things that sort of happen, and I think that's what she's getting at. I love it. I think good on her, World Rugby New Zealand Rugby Women's Player of the Year last year, and she's really starting to grow. I mean, I've been playing with Chelsea since she was young, and I love her. She's a young Tukaro girl and really coming into her own, and I think that post shows, where she's at in terms of her maturity and to have the courage to speak up. I love it.
Who is she appealing to? Like, how does this get fixed? Is it New Zealand Rugby? Is it changes need to be made at the top?
I think she's appealing to everyone. It's not directly at New Zealand Rugby. It could be, it could be the last final call for a sponsor, some major sponsor to be like, yes, this has gone on too long. I'm in. I'm going to invest. So she's calling out to media. She's calling out to everyone. And the thing is that she's getting backing from sportsmen and women all around the world from all different codes. Because it's not just women's rugby; it's women's sports right throughout that she's now sort of, I suppose, taken the little fiddle really in terms of her platform and where she stands in the game, and she's got a really big standing in the game. So I love it, What I also love about it is that the boys are backing it, The Adi Savias, I think Jerome Kaino, all of those guys are all commenting on it too, and it's like, great. Like we need those allies and those champions that get it. We're always going to have people that may not and talk about bums on seats in stadiums, and that no one wants to watch women play rugby. You still got that old school mentality that comes through as well. But yeah, I just think I'm glad. I'd rather you have that balance of the haters as well as the supporters, because at least it's being talked about. I'm just like, who cares? Let's bring it out.
It's great. It's so, we love it when someone who's current and at the top of their game is speaking out, because it's so much more powerful.
100%.
We're always talking about footballers doing the same.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things along the same lines, to jump back to rugby league, I think one of the most successful rugby league tournaments was 2008, when the men's and women's tournaments were held concurrently. 2021, is it still going on this year? That's real rugby league ignorance.
Yes, at this stage it is.
And it's men's, women's, and a wheelchair tournament as well. Do you think that's a better way to approach the sport, is to bring everyone in together and run those tournaments at the same time?
Yeah, 100% I do. I'm all for that inclusion of having them all run side by side. I love it. I love what New Zealand, what the Rugby League World Cup are doing with this tournament, because it's the first of its kind. There's no other code that runs these tournaments, side by side, men's and women's, as well as wheelchair as well. And I love that. And actually, outside of that, they're also running like a festivals of rugby league. So that's like armed forces, police, physical disability. So people that aren't sort of wheelchair users. And there's sort of international games for teams that didn't quite make the tier, or specifically in the women's game. So there's heaps of other stuff going in and around that tournament, but it's also what they're doing outside of that too. It's all the social impact stuff that they're doing in communities. I mean, I think that they've got it right, and COVID may put a damper on that because at this stage it's still going ahead, but whether it does or doesn't, it's like they're setting the blueprint and saying to other sports, this is really how it should be happening. I mean, aside from Olympics, no other sporting code is really doing this, and I love that Rugby League is the first to sort of put their hand up and invest. And the other thing they're doing is they're pay parity. So every single athlete is being paid the same, whether you're men, woman, or wheelchair player. If you're playing in that World Cup level for those three groups, it's all pay parity. I love that. Yeah.
And inclusion's a big part of what you do, right? With your everyday role with the Halberg Trust. Maybe tell us what you do in there and how inclusion kind of impacts on everything.
Yeah, I'm so passionate about inclusion. I think that specifically when it comes to sport or recreation, being active, whatever it might be, that everyone should get that opportunity to have those opportunities to have a fair and equal chance at giving something a go, regardless of their ability or disability, whatever it might be. So in my role with the Halberg Foundation, I actually work with the age group of 5 through to 21 with physical or visual or hearing impaired young people to help them find opportunities to engage in sport, recreation, play, whatever that might be. I also go in and educate the sports deliverers or the school teachers as a real, big target group that we target around how they can modify and adapt their PE sessions so that these kids at school are being included, because often they're not. If it's PE time, these kids who may use a wheelchair or have some sort of physical impairment, sort of said, oh, do you want to go to the library because the rest of the class is going to PE, or we're having cross-country day so you don't have to come to school tomorrow, things like that. So that really makes me angry because I know what I've gotten out of sport, and I've been in this disability, I suppose, environment for quite some time, because prior to this was 7 years with Life Unlimited, working in the disability community as well. And it's just so often they get put in the too hard basket, and that to a certain extent, but I just feel like if we can educate people, then they'll be more open to actually trying something to give these kids a go. And that's all I want. I just want to see these kids having a go and falling in love with it, because otherwise if they don't get the opportunity, they'll never experience it. And sport's so powerful. Sport, or just being active, and being active for these kids is vitally important to their well-being, their mental and physical health. If they don't get those opportunities, they're already sort of quite vulnerable in terms of their independence and what their quality of life is. But if they got the injection of what sport can offer or being active can offer, then they'll thrive in that area, I think. So I'm sorry, I could go on for ages about it.
Well, I can hear how passionate you are about it. Where did that start? How did you end up in the Life Unlimited role, or was there a history before that, or how have you landed in this inclusion space?
Yeah, I suppose I have an interesting education background. I have 4 diplomas and no degrees. So and they're kind of quite varied. So I've got sort of national diplomas in sort of Māori health, and then sort of adult tertiary education, and then business administration and computing, and whatever the other one is, sports leadership or something like that. And so I've got a very varied, but all the roles that I've always had has always been with people. I worked in a youth justice service for 3 or 4 years. From that, I went on to mental health services for another 4 years, and kind of got into this disability space. And I learnt a lot working with youth, a lot. And then I also, I really, I suppose, worked with an amazing team at Hawara Waikato in that Māori mental health space. And we had that sort of the hospital out at Tamahere. And I learnt a lot there. But what I suppose the key things that I learnt was around that Māori mental health space, in terms of te whare tapawhā, and whether the learnings were for the people that we worked with, but mostly for myself. And it really helped me connect with my own culture and who I was, and what my own mental health was like as well. And then that kind of evolved to working in this disability space. And mostly I worked in sort of the intellectual cognitive disability with Life Unlimited. And so I just found it so rewarding. It was so rewarding, like seeing these, and mostly I was working with sort of teenage adults that possibly operated at cognitively operated at a level that, was probably 5, maybe 8 years, younger than themselves, sort of thing. But so it was like working with adults, but with a mentality of younger, thing. But they brought so much energy and enthusiasm and a real genuine keenness to want to learn and want to live a good life, kind of thing. And some were aware of it and some weren't, but it just didn't matter to me. I just wanted to be there, and I didn't want to be there to be at the front of them. I just wanted to be next to them, supporting them, not pulling them along and saying, look, this is what I think your life should be. It's like, what do you want as your life, your life to be, and how can I help you do that? It wasn't about me leading, it was about them leading and me just kind of pushing from behind. And I loved that. And then that sort of filtered into the physical disability space, and leading on to my work with Halberg. So I'll always work, I think, alongside people. I love that mentoring kind of space, and whether it's one-to-one or one-to-many or whatever it might be. For me, it's all about serving people, and I love that.
You can see just by what you're saying, you'd be an incredible mentor, especially with what you've already told us about your upbringing and the challenges you faced. You'd have so many life lessons and so much guidance. Yeah,
and the thing, like the thing though, is that like with the life lessons is how much I actually learn from the people that I work with. It's so interesting. And we just came off last week and we're at the Halberg Games, and we had almost 200 athletes there, sort of from 8 through to 21 years old, competing. And I was just like inspired the whole time. Like I just felt like this kid, like watching these young athletes like compete and run races or swim races or go, they were doing CrossFit or turbo touch wheelchair, rugby, all of it, like we had like 20 plus sports on, as an opportunity for them to give it a go, and would like to see some of them push past their limits, almost
jump off the cliff.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, I know that feeling. Just go for it. I was just like blown away.
So, how important does that storytelling aspect become of people, of those minorities, of Māori people, of Pacifica people, of disability, LGBTQT, like that's becoming more important, right? Because like Chelsea has illustrated in her post, that's your story, that's someone's story. So telling these stories becomes quite important.
Yeah, exactly. And storytelling is like just something that's entrenched us anyway, like especially sort of Māori culture and history. We kind of grew up on storytelling. Our waiata, our songs and all of that are all stories that sort of have been passed down. And, even growing up, the stories that our grandparents told us, you always hold on to that. So it's the same thing, telling these people's stories so that they don't feel so alone, or that, it's that whole, if I can see her, I can be her kind of thing, in terms of female sports stars. I didn't see any when I grew up. But now I'm seeing tons, and I'm all over it. And I'm like, and it's not just rugby and rugby league players. I mean, I love Serena Williams and all these other ones now because I can actually see them. So, there's that real, I suppose, inspiration that comes from that. And same in the disability communities and all the other minority communities. The more that we hear these stories and we can see that these are possibilities, it just takes one little moment to inspire someone to be like, that's what I want to do, or that's who I want to be, or, so it just takes that, and that's, I think, really similar. Any person that's succeedable could tell you that there's always been that kind of one moment for that they've seen someone be like, and that's exactly, but it's continuous, it's a continuous thing. I mean, I still see things or hear things and be like, that's exactly what I want to do, kind of thing. So it's awesome.
Your life is so full. The great thing about Between Two Beers is we've got a guest here with perhaps the most full career, the most decorated career of anyone we've ever had, and we're 70 minutes in and we haven't spoken at all about any three of years. There's so much cool stuff on the outside. But we are just going to touch on a few key years and points because, it would be remiss of us not to. Let's just talk 2013. You were maybe at the peak of your powers, and I understand you went from a Sevens World Cup to a Rugby League World Cup in the space of, was it a week or 5 days?
Yeah.
Something like that?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's pretty crazy.
That is crazy. That started at the beginning of the year for me. So in January, with women's sports, you know, our calendars are, you know, sort of, we're kind of told we don't get a lot of notice. But that year I was already part of that contracting system in the sevens, and we knew that we were working towards that new World Cup, and I knew exactly when it was. And then sort of around February they announced, okay, yep, we're definitely running with the Rugby League World Cup. And I looked at the dates, I was like, shit, these are a week apart. How am I going to do this sort of thing? So, you know, I was really clear with the sevens, like, you know, once World Cup is done, I'm going to Rugby League, you know. I still had to be selected, but I almost set in my mind my goal in February when I knew the exact dates, like, this is what I'm going to do. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to do it. So, yeah, lucky enough to get selected in both squads. And that was actually my first year of being named captain for the Kiwi Ferns, was that 2013 year. So, you know, that ensured that I was absolutely going to that World Cup, although I knew I had a Sevens World Cup to get through first. And so it was all kind of going to plan. And you were probably right, I was at the peak of my career, and I was literally juggling.
Whoa!
Juggling, you know, from one training camp to the next, and that was my life for that whole year. And probably the one person that suffered throughout that was actually my son. You know, I was barely seeing him. I'd actually shifted him in with my mum back down in Tigo or Pataru, so that I could do this, because I just sort of said, look, I just can't do these two things and be a full-time mum, so you're going to have to go live with mum, and, you know, I'll see you when I can, kind of thing. But it was, you know, I didn't regret it. So we were in Russia for that Sevens World Cup. We won that on the Saturday, and then on the Sunday I flew from Russia straight over to England and met my team, who had already flown out from New Zealand, and I met them in England. So, and then I was away for like months on end.
Did you do your recovery session after the Sevens final before you flew?
I slept a lot on the plane, that's for sure. And but I mean, even that was a circus, actually, because New Zealand Rugby League had booked my flight. So I said, okay, I'm going to be in Russia. You booked me a flight from Russia to thing. And so they booked me a flight. And so I went to the airport with the Sevens girls, because I said, oh, you guys fly out like an hour before me, so I'll just come to the airport with my Sevens team. So I got to the airport. They go and check in, and our manager at the time, he said, oh, well, I'll come with you to help you check in, get to the counter. I was like, oh, you know, I'm on this flight. And they were like, oh, yeah. Showed them the ticket, and they were like, you're at the wrong airport, mate. Like, your airport's like 3 hours away. I was like, what the flip? And they're like, no, you need to catch like this train and then get onto this train, and then you'll be there. And I was freaking out, because, you know, in Russia, they're like, don't take taxis anywhere, and, you know, it's Russia. And I was like, and my coach and my manager at the time was like, nah, you're coming back to New Zealand. We're going to get you on our flight. And I was like, no, you're not taking me. And he was like, no, we'll get you back to New Zealand, then we'll get you on another flight over there. And I was like, nah, I'm going. And like, because I just thought, no way, like, it's going to take me a couple of days. And I was just like, nah, I'm not doing it. And I literally said to him, nah, I'm not doing it. Get my bag. And I'm just like, and so he puts me on this train. I have no idea what I'm doing, but oh man, I was just crying the whole way. Like, oh my God, it was one real quick way to sober up. And I eventually made it. I made it to this other airport on the other side of Russia, wherever it was, and I got on that flight and landed in England an hour before my team arrived.
During that Sevens World Cup, Kiwi Ferns coach has got to be watching the game.
He's
going, don't you please get injured. Don't you dare get injured.
No, well, she was, Lily was our coach at the time, and she was awesome, you know, to back me, to allow me to do that. And she didn't... it was probably Sevens, because I was contracted, saying I negotiated in Sevens that this is what I was going to do. And so Lee just kind of had to accept that sort of thing. And but she was awesome, you know, in terms of her support, and, you know, even knowing that I was the captain and still making this a priority, and then, you know, landing there. But I know when I landed there, and then the sort of first, you know, the first training was like a flush, you know, because the girls had been flying for so long and things like that, and I was the same. But then like my Sevens head kicked in, and I was like, oh, let's just end with a few sprints and da da da. And they were like, this ain't Sevens anymore. And I was like, no, let's go. And I had all the girls on the line, and they're just like, oh, this crazy girl sort of thing. So and my best mate who was playing at the time, she actually ended up like kind of pulling a hammy or something. She was like, it's just stupid sprints. And I was like, no, you'll be fine, sort of thing. So she's like giving me heaps of shit about it.
And then you make your debut the following year for the Black Ferns proper.
Yeah, it was.
At 32, is that one of the
Yeah, I think
oldest
so.
oldest debuts of a New Zealand women's rugby international?
I'd have to check, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Are you doing initiations at 32? Are you having to still stand up and sing a song and do all that stuff?
Still had to do all
That's
the
cool.
initiations, but I must admit, they've got the whole back seat rule, and then there's kind of like the seat before the back seat, and they just kind of were like, you can just get in that seat.
Really?
On age alone kind of thing.
You didn't have to do the front of the bus thing?
No, I didn't have to do so. I wasn't allowed in the back seat because that was only 20 cats plus, but I was kind of allowed close to the back seat, even though I sort of was a rookie really. So, but they were all my mates, so they were like.
I was going to say, how close were you to those athletes? Did you guys knock around?
Yeah, super close. So, I knew most of them, and a few of them had sort of done the sevens and that with me anyway. So, and I was already like good mates with them, and they knew I was always sniffing around the scenes.
Yeah, well, about time, honey. Jeez, one World Cup too late. Come on.
100%. So it was just sort of, I suppose, a matter of time before I but 15s, I always had this little bit of a love-hate with 15s. I never really enjoyed it, so I never bothered.
Too many people.
Yeah, exactly. And I just thought...
13 or 7.
Yeah. And I hated the kicking, and I hated the scrums and stuff like that. I was like, I'm a winger. I don't even barely touch the ball if you forwards are crap, sort of thing. Whereas league, I'd be like, yeah, fourth tackle, it's my ball, at least I got a guaranteed run. So I sort of was never really chased that, although I was always aware of the Black Ferns and all my friends were in it. It was just sort of like, oh no, I'll just do my league and my sevens thing. Because prior to the New Zealand sevens, we did years of the Māori women's sevens, and we were travelling all over for that, but we were just kind of never endorsed by, I suppose, New Zealand Rugby, because we were the Māori team. But yeah, we had a really good setup, and we'd done Rome sevens and Hong Kong sevens and all of that. So it was actually going for, there was a decent bunch of us still playing sevens consistently throughout those years, whereas everyone kind of thinks it kicked off with the Go for Gold in 2012, I think, yeah, so.
And then 2017, I think both World Cups are in the same year, right? The Rugby World Cup and the Rugby League World Cup.
Yeah.
Did you ever formally retire from rugby, or did it just kind of peter out and you just focused back in on the rugby league?
Yeah, I probably formally retired from sevens. So post Olympics, once the girls got back from the Olympics and that, then they sort of had like a retirement deal for some of us, and some of us older ones, we took it. So that was kind of my, swan song, I suppose, in terms of the sevens, although I did go back and play a couple of years Waikato and things like that. But yeah, I probably never really formally retired from 15s. I was really gutted not to go to that 2017 World Cup. I sort of, during the Lions tour that we'd had here, I'd hurt my shoulder, and the doc kind of come and said, oh, look, it's actually not that good. And I was like, I still played that last game. You could just do what you've done and strap it and it'll be fine. And she's like, well, no, it doesn't kind of work like that. And so I just kind of thought, he'll pick me anyway. He won't worry about it. He knows I can handle it, kind of thing. And I don't really tackle that much. I'll be sweet. And he wasn't. And I was just like, I was so gutted. I was super gutted. But then it just sort of, I just thought, oh well, it is what it is, honey. And then I was just straight on the phone to the keeper. He's like, hey, I can actually come 2 months earlier now because I'm not going to the rugby. So.
So was that a possibility to do both still?
It was,
Wow.
yeah, it was still, because we weren't sort of on full-time contracts with the Black Ferns then, so it was always kind of, it always kind of worked out that if rugby was first, like whatever the pinnacle event was, if it was first, it worked out. If league was to be first, it probably wouldn't. So there was a couple of years in between there, like I missed a couple of Anzac tests and some of the nines, the first ever nines, like I was part of that squad and had to miss that because Sevens was like, nah. I think we had the Houston Sevens like 2 weeks later, but after the first ever nines, and I really want to play the Kiwi Ferns of that, and they're like, no way, we're off to Houston and to actually not playing. So yeah, it was always kind of that I suppose that little bit of control that New Zealand Rugby had, because we were kind of on these semi-professional contracts, so they had the biggest say. But once literally those contracts, they were always sort of sectioned. So once you literally stepped off the field that day, you're off contract. So I was like, sweet, I'm off to league. So Yeah, there was always lots of whispers in my ears, like, league this and don't do that, and if you go to league, we might second guess, but the following year I'd get picked again, so it's like.
And then you finally retire from rugby league from the Kiwi Ferns.
Yep.
2018. I understand.
2020.
Sorry.
Yep.
I understand you didn't really tell anyone in the lead up to that. Inside your own head, you'd made your mind up though.
Yeah.
So how are you approaching that camp, knowing that this is your last captain's run, this is your last national anthem, this is your last haka, and you've not shared that with too many people that are in the group? Are you having to control what I imagine would be some emotions?
Yeah, for sure. So I roomed with one of the rookies, young Autumn Rain, who I'd played rugby in league with her mum for years, and so I roomed with her and for me...
That's a great stat in itself, by the way.
Yeah.
Played with your mum.
Exactly.
And now I'm playing for the national team.
And so for me, I just didn't want... Because last year when, I knew that was going to be my last game, we had sort of like 9 rookies in the team. And I just thought, look, this needs to be about them. This is their big moment. I knew what it was like to have my first big moment, and I couldn't strip them of that, which is why I chose to say nothing. But also within that week, you're right, like it was super emotional. Like every morning I was like wide awake at 5, and we're down the viaduct, so I'd just go roaming, early hours in the morning, walking around the viaduct, just processing things.
We've all done that as well.
Yeah, catching all the ones you don't know. But and so for me, I just had to keep ticking it through, and I suppose checking in, is this the right decision? Are you sure? And it wasn't till we had the captain's run on Friday, and literally before that I pulled my coach aside and I said, look, I just want to talk to you about something. And he's like, yeah. And I said, look, I'm not going to tell the girls, but I do want to let you know out of respect that, like, this is my last game. And he was just like, what? We've got World Cup. And but he I explained it. I said, look, it's just where I'm at, and he was real respectful of that. And I said, I really respect if you don't mention it and things like that. And he was like, look, can I mention it to some of the people at New Zealand Rugby League? I said, yeah, as long as girls don't find out, nobody else finds out, cool. So that was cool. And so we went out and we played the game, and I told my wife and I told some of my family. And then it was interesting. So after the game, my family did this big haka in the stand, and everyone's like, what's going on? And I still hadn't told the girls, and so all the girls are just coming off, they're feeling good, they've debuted and then we get into the change rooms, and Greg Peters, our New Zealand Rugby League CEO, comes in and he has these big words, and then he just turns in and goes, and honey, da 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 da, and then the girls are like, oh, okay, but he didn't actually say retirement.
Yeah.
And then my coach just sort of said, look, I think this is now the time, because I was actually going to tell them in the morning, because I just wanted them to have a great night and enjoy their moment. But then I kind of got put on the spot, and then it was just like the most somberest feeling in the change room. Like the girls' faces just dropped, and then there was like tears, and it was like, oh my gosh, and then they stood and did a big haka. Then I was in tears, and it was like, oh damn, like I just didn't want to strip them of their moment, but I knew, and it was an awesome send off. Really, the next day we had the reunion, and it was cool to get in amongst, it was the Kiwis and Kiwi Ferns reunion. So. And it was also the Kiwi Ferns 25-year celebration, so lots of my old past players that I've played alongside and good mates were all there too. So I was like, yeah, it just, again, for some reason, it just felt right. It was the right time, and I've definitely had no regret, actually. Like I've been around a couple of club games now, and just like, yeah, I'm so glad I'm not out there. And
you did have time to play a few more games in Pataru though. Afterwards?
I haven't. So I played club with them last year prior to my last game. So literally the last time I put my boots on was that test match.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So how's the body now? Is it dinged up? Do you wake up in the morning creaky, or are you good to go?
Yeah, no, I'm pretty good to go, to be honest. I'm way more lazier, and I'm just my wife is like constantly like, should we go to the gym? Should we go to the gym? I'm like, yeah, you know. And then I'll check the scales and be like, yeah, I better get there. And, you know, my weight quite easily sort of fluctuates and I can control it pretty well. So I've always known what a good playing weight and what a stable weight and then when I'm overweight kind of thing. So when I see those scales tipping a bit too far, I'm like, oh yeah, you know. And she gets real frustrated because I can do like a week and a half in training and then be back to normal weight and then be like, yeah, just sit it out for another couple of weeks. So I'm kind of in that phase. Like I know, like I must admit though, when I do get back into the gym, whether I go for like a solid 2 weeks, I get that addiction. But I think I'm still just trying to figure out what am I training for. Like I've always got to do something for a purpose, and you know, sometimes it's just
master sport, surely.
Well, I did. I had a good go. I went along to Masters Athletics this year and picked up a few medals there, so that was all right. But I was carrying an injury the whole time, so I didn't really train, and that's why I say
clean up next year.
So I only got a silver medal.
Well, I know it's a school night and we're well past your bedtime. I got a few more points to touch on. Sky, working in the media, broadcasting. Was there a point during your career where you had a bit of an eye on that and thought that maybe that was a future?
100% not. Yeah, no, I never even, I never had even thought of that, to be honest. My first go at it was the All-Stars game. So they had the men's rugby league All-Stars game, and I'd gotten injured, so I didn't go along to that. And they said, oh, well, look, do you want to jump on the couch and chat about it? And they were bringing in Brent Webb to talk the Indigenous side. And so I said, oh, yeah, I'll give it a go. And, you know, we just got to talk about the women. And I knew them all. They were all my mates. I said, yeah, this is an easy gig. So I did that. And then a week later, they said, oh, you want to come along and do a little bit of commentary for Sevens? They had the first Ignite Sevens. I was like, oh, I don't know how to do that, but yeah, I'll give it a go. And it was with sort of like Scotty Stevenson was still there then, and met Ricky Swanell and the likes, and Ken Laban. And so I kind of got to work with a pretty decent team, and I was like, had no idea what I was doing, but just kind of talked about what I was seeing out there, and then did that, and then got another call back for another game, whatever that was. And then literally I got this email saying, oh, we'd like to have a chat with you. When can you come up? And I was like, well, who are you and what do you want? And like, I don't live in Auckland, so that's a bit of hoo-ha for me. And he's like, oh, just whenever you're up next. So I said, oh, well, you know, it's got to be in 2 weeks. I'll call him then. So they gave me this address, and I still didn't really know. And so I had asked around, like, hey, who's this guy? And they're like, oh, like, that's like, you know, the 2IC of the... And I was like, oh, okay, like... And so I was like, well, what does he want? And they were like, oh, well, I don't know. So I just rocked in like my track pants and my hoodie from my kind of like my Halberg uniform. And I walk in, and then I'm like in a boardroom full of like all these men who I still didn't really know who they were. And then they're like, oh, look, we really, you know, what's your plans in terms of your playing career, and have you got anything to, you know, go hand in hand, and here's a contract, and if you're interested, you know, sign it and send it back to us when you're ready, kind of thing. And yeah, I was just blown away. I was like, oh my God, like I don't really know anything about this. And yeah, and I mean, it was a great contract. It was, you know, 3 times bigger than anything I'd ever got in terms of a playing contract. I almost crashed my truck when I seen it. I was like, holy crap. So yeah, I jumped at it, and it's been a real eye-opener. I think, you know, just being in front of a camera, like, when I was doing it for sport, you know, confident as didn't really care actually that you're in front of a camera, but when you're there and you're commenting and things like that, it's like, yeah, I definitely go, even now, still through like, you know, real anxiety and having to have that real self-belief that, yep, they pay me for my opinion, you know, and I may not agree with others on the panel, but this is my opinion and this is what I'm seeing, or this is what I think about this certain team or player. And just having, I suppose, that self-belief to back my opinion took a little bit to learn. Yeah, my preppers, I know Mills and a few of the others are like always cracking up at me because I rock up with like notes galore. Like,
yeah, I got that from Ricky Swanell. I asked her opinion of you, and she said meticulous, absolutely meticulous planning in terms of your commentary. So is that from your sporting background, that preparation?
You know, because a lot of the stuff that I'm doing with Sky is in the men's game, and if I'm honest, I haven't followed the men's game a lot in my own career. Like, I don't need to write all these notes from the women's game when I'm doing anything in that space because I know them and, you know, I know it, so I don't really need to. But in the men's game, like, you know, Super Rugby and NRL and things like that, I'm like, oh yeah, and it's quite hard working across 2 different, you know, big competitions. So, you know, like, people who are quite sort of household names, I was like, I don't really know this guy. So if he shows up in our scripts, I'm like, look, I've got to go learn. So I'd learn everything that I needed to learn about them and sort of thing. And I totally over prepare. And I say it all the time, I totally over prepare. I might write a whole page on one player and say like 2 things on the page, but I'm like, I don't care.
That's not what we do.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I'm really loving it. Like the team there are real cool. Like some really awesome colleagues to work with that really want to help you out. Like Ricky, for example, Ken Laban is the man. He just like tells me straight, no girl, yeah, that was crap, and you need to get this, and this. Like he's really awesome, but really, positive in terms of his feedback as well. But even just the way some of the journalisms work, like I get real nervous. The interviewing stuff, when I have to interview, like I don't mind commenting, but when I have to interview a player, they're like, oh, just ask them whatever. So the build up, so I prepare all these questions, and then the conversation starts, and I don't end up asking them anything on my paper. Like you just kind of roll with it, but it's something you still kind of have to learn. But yeah, I've really enjoyed it. I mean, Sky's really looking after me, and I'm just real grateful for the opportunity that they give me. I'm always intrigued by the comments, like, whenever I'm on a show or a panel or something and my phone starts going off, I'm like, okay, who's got something to say about what I'm wearing or what my hair looks like and all that? Because honestly, the most comments I'll get interesting enough, from females is either what I look like or what I'm wearing or
Really?
my makeup or my hair, whereas all the comments I get from males is all like, hey, that was a really good point you made, or, I really liked your comments on da-da-da-da. So I'm like, it's really interesting, and that's, I suppose it's, I mean, lots of people that know me know I don't wear all of that crap on a normal day. I'm a track pants and a hoodie kind of girl, but, that's what the role requests, and if I can be comfortable in that space and as comfortable as I can be, then I'm just going to, roll with it. So, yeah.
You're doing a great job. I don't watch a lot of rugby, but the snippets I have seen, you really sort of shine. And anyone who's made it this far through the podcast will attest, like, so articulate, so well-spoken, such clear views and opinions. So, yeah, it's awesome. Great guest, and thanks for coming in. Shay, anything to tick off your list?
I've got one that just popped into my head because it really resonates with me from my growing up. But where were you when the Warriors played their first game?
I was there. I was
Nice.
there. I was at the game. My dad took us along. Yeah, we're on the grass bankment there. I remember the hot
soldiers.
dogs and
The soldiers rolling around in the helicopter in the sand.
yeah, all of that. I was like, oh, well, yeah. So my dad took us to the first ever
That's
game.
pretty cool.
That was super cool. Yeah.
It would have been great for you to play it for that jersey, right?
Yeah, I know. That's another thing. I never actually got a jersey number or a cap for the Warriors. I think I love the Warriors. The club. How they looked after me and throughout that time, regardless. I didn't get to play for them, but even now I keep in regular contact with a few of them. So it's they always have a special place in my heart. I think the Warriors club.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, incredibly open. I think it is a school night, so we should probably let Honey go. It's been amazing. Thank you so much for coming in and sharing. And I think it's testament to your upbringing, no matter how challenging it might have been to begin with. But where you are now, you've certainly learnt a lot of lessons on the way. And yeah, this has been really awesome. How long have we gone?
Yeah, good. Normal time. Yeah,
Decent,
thank you so much,
yeah.
honey. It's been great.
No, I think too. So yeah, all the best. Thank yous.
Catch you next time.
Yep, for sure.
Hey guys, thanks for listening. If you've made it to the end, hopefully that means you've enjoyed the episode. If that's the case and you feel strongly enough about it to share on social media, we'd greatly appreciate it. It's the quickest and easiest way to help the podcast grow. Thanks for tuning in.